Hello everyone, I'm Nathan Taylor and welcome to the On The Record podcast presented by the Western Weekender. On this podcast we're joined by special guests who all have such great stories to tell about Penrith and the role they've played in our city. They are Penrith stories told by Penrith people. I'm hosting the podcast today because the tables have turned and the guest is the usual host and editor of the Western Weekender, Troy Dodds. Troy has been the editor of The Weekender for 12 years and has also worked across radio both locally and with 2UE and 2GB. Plus, there's a few things you might not know. I really hope you enjoy our chat. Troy, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here on the other side of the desk, and good to see you've figured out how to turn the air conditioning on in the On The Record studios as well. It's very warm in here.
It is quite warm. Now, Troy, the question you always start things off with, where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was actually born in Liverpool. It's Liverpool Hospital in southwestern Sydney. Don't remember much about Liverpool though, because I moved to Penrith when I was about 2 years old. I think my parents had a one of those 50-50 decisions to make. I think it was either Campbelltown or Penrith, and they chose Penrith. So, yes, grew up in Penrith in the late 80s, early 1990s.
Excellent. And tell us about your schooling. Now, what kind of student were you, and is that where your media interest started, perhaps?
Well, yeah, it is, but it's a pretty poor schooling story, to be honest. I wasn't I wasn't that good at school. In saying that, if there was something that I was interested in, whether it was did IT for a while there and in English and whatnot, I was into it. But I just was not a studier. I probably studied the least of anyone that we'd all know for the HSC exams, to be honest, because it just wasn't my thing. And just my parents obviously had never been really through it before, someone going through the HSC, so they probably didn't really know, hey, should he be studying a bit more than he is or whatnot? They were both at work and I was supposedly studying during the day, but so probably not the best student, but in saying that, yeah, it is probably where the media interest came from. I can remember once in English class with Mr. Yakub at Jamison High School in year 11. The assignment for the day was to put this particular thing that we were writing in a newspaper format.
Yep.
And I came in the traditional classic newspaper format, headline, sub-headline, big masthead across the top, things done in columns and all of that, like it was a newspaper. No one else had done that. They kind of didn't grasp that.
Yep.
I was probably the only kid in year 11 who was buying the Daily Telegraph in the morning. So I remember then there was a feeling, I guess, from my English teacher then that I'd done something pretty good, and he actually said, you should really follow this and whatnot. But I'd always had the general interest. I used to, when I was much younger, watch the 6 o'clock news, write down all the stories, and then repeat it back into the Mirror a bit later on in the night. Right. So always had the media interest around.
And I know you used to create your own shows as well, like with some family members. Is that right? You used to?
Yeah. Always used to. I basically had my own TV channel, channel 6, operating as a rival to 7 and 9, and I used to do the TV guides for it and everything like that, and my own shows and things like that. So. Yeah, always had a bit of a media interest, I guess.
And what did your parents think about you having such an interest in media? Usually kids watch The Simpsons at 6 p.m, but you were watching, Ann Sanders and whoever was on Channel 7 at the time.
Ross Simons.
Yes, Ann and Ross.
Yeah. Look, I think that it was probably a little bit unexpected for them in some ways, in that that there's no media person in the family, there's no history of media or anything like that. But they had a pretty strong interest in it. My dad in particular, some of my earliest memories are driving to my grandma's house in school holidays, and the old Gloria theme song from the Alan Jones breakfast show would ring out, because that'd be what Dad was listening to. So there was always an affiliation, I guess, particularly with talk radio. That's kind of where it started. But I don't think that they had the highest of hopes necessarily that I was going to follow a career like this one. Post school, I did some work experience at a computer repair shop on Bat Street. I think they thought that might have been where I was headed, mainly because I knew how to work the computer that they, particularly my dad would struggle with. That was not the best work experience kid either, but yeah. So then I managed to get some work experience at 2UE in year 11 and 12. Yep. They put me on a gardening show that was actually probably one of their more popular shows on a Saturday and Sunday morning. So a little bit of work experience there, and actually did some stuff for their website, which they gave me all the access to. These days it'd be a much different situation, but I don't think people had considered that sort of thing. So yeah, I think they were pretty surprised in the end that it was the career that I followed.
So was it all media that you enjoyed, or was it, like you just mentioned then, you liked print, you did your own fake TV news channel,
Yeah.
you loved radio. Was it just everything associated with media?
Yeah,
or
I think media was pretty much it. I never really had a view that I would be doing anything else. I mean, yeah, the computer repair thing, literally just because I kind of knew my way around a computer and the settings, and I'm the pseudo IT guy at the Western Weekender as well.
Yes,
so,
you are.
I kind of know all that sort of, not too deep into it, but so that's why I did work experience there at Advantage Computer Maintenance. Don't know if they're still around, but yeah, did a terrible job there, to be honest. And but yeah, that was probably the only other thing really. Other than that, media. Even as much as I fell into it, media would have been the only interest that I had in pursuing.
And to me, when I was, growing up, and I enjoyed a lot of sport media, so I'd read a lot of sport articles and things like that. What about for you? I mean, I know you're a bit of a political junkie. You love all that sort of stuff. But you also love your sport as well. Was there a particular avenue that you would particularly listen to? Or
yeah, definitely sport and general news. I can tell you, politics-wise, I had zero interest. And I'll be honest with you, even when I went for the job here at the Western Weekender, if I would have been asked who the state member for Penrith was at that time, I would not have been able to answer the question. And I'm just lucky I wasn't, because Bernard Bratusa, the previous editor who hired me here, he would ask that question quite often, and I later on have asked that question as well.
You do, yes.
I would not have had a clue. I just had zero interest in politics, but general news, and general news from a historical point of view as well. I have a great fascination in going back and watching how different tragedies or triumphs were covered.
Okay.
But yeah, definitely sport. Rugby league was it for me growing up. I mentioned earlier I was the only kid who bought the Daily Telegraph, but I was also picking up Big League and Rugby League Week and whatever else, and that's probably what I was reading in maths class when I should have been figuring out percentages and all that kind of stuff. But no, Rugby League was where it really, if I could have found a job, which I ultimately did, that involved rugby league somehow and media, that was, I guess, the dream that was being followed.
Well, people that know you, Troy, obviously, they know you're a big rugby league fan. You write our rugby league content in the paper every week, and you have done for many, many years at the paper. So how did the Panthers come into your life? I mean, we'll get to some of your career and stuff later, but the Panthers, obviously, you mentioned rugby league. You bought Big League magazine. You would have read the lift outs in the Telegraph. But Panthers, I mean, I have seen some early photos of you in a Bulldogs jumper, but
I thought they were burnt. But yeah, well, my mum's from, and my dad, I guess, originally too, from that Bankstown area. My mum grew up in Condell Park, and my dad in Bass Hill, so Bulldogs territory. So my mum in particular was a big Bulldogs fan, and she really only made the switch to be a Penrith fan to follow the local team here as the Panthers. So I guess if she was to do what I would do to my daughter, I would have been a Bulldogs fan, because there'll be my daughter will not be following any other.
You wouldn't be very happy right now either if you're a Bulldogs fan too, by the way.
No, well, that's right. I'd be very disappointed. But yeah, so she became a Panthers fan. We started going to games here, I guess, in the late 1980s. And that's just sort of how I fell in love with it. Originally, I'm sitting on the hill with them, and I was very into, as most kids I think of my vintage were, into trading cards and all of that sort of stuff. So you'd wait after the game and get your card signed, and and it was the only opportunity, I guess, to see other teams as well. These days, I think there's a lot more, you have appearances and you have probably a bit better access because of, the way the world works now. But in those days, if you wanted your Ricky Stewart gold card signed, well, you had to wait for Penrith to play Canberra and wait out at the dressing room there. So, yeah, used to do all of that. And then, just started going with friends and whatnot. At one stage, I think there was about 12 of us who were all going to the footy when I was in high school.
Yep.
And very slowly, that group dwindled down to pretty much just me. I remember going by myself for a while there as well. So as other kids, I guess, started, I'm going to do something else or whatnot, I just stuck with them. I just fell in love with it. And, I can't really remember I remember it, but I can't remember in any great detail the 1991 grand final. But, sticking with it during the 90s. There was something about, just like recently, in the lead up to the premiership in 2021, there was something about sticking with it in the 90s that I liked, even though the team was struggling.
There were some lean years there, and that's probably why a lot of maybe your mates sort of dropped off over the years and maybe stopped following the sport or went to other teams. But you actually had a few interactions with some players. You mentioned not
Yep.
just, waiting outside the dressing sheds after games, but I know that a couple of them visited you in hospital when you were a kid because you broke your leg.
Yeah, when I was 12 years old, I can't even remember the actual street now. It's in Jamison Town. Romsley Street, I think it is, Romsley Road. In Jamison Town there, and there's a bit of a hill that goes down, and I was there with a mate of mine just riding the bikes down the hill, as you do. And there was a car that it sounds stupid when I tell people I crashed into a parked car because that's not quite the story. I was coming down the hill. This car comes to the intersection, and I'm like, for some reason in my mind, I'm like, this car's still going to go. He's not going to wait for me. So what I'll do is I'll just casually glide around the corner instead of going straight down because he's going to come out and he might hit me.
Yep.
He obviously, and now I think about it and go, why would I think that? Because he obviously saw me coming and he stayed there. He stayed there waiting for me to come past, and I've just casually just smashed straight into the side of his car. Went right over the top of it, somersaulted over the top of it, landed on my head.
Helmet?
And had a helmet on.
Oh.
In fact, was told constantly from the ambos on the side and in hospital that without the helmet, we certainly wouldn't be recording this today. Broke my leg. I remember sitting there actually and thinking, I'll just stand up in a minute and I probably won't tell my mum and dad about this because
Just limp home somehow.
No, just limp home. That certainly wasn't going to happen. And I can remember, it's funny, and I'm sure people have been through this sort of experience. I can remember screaming, but I can't remember being in pain.
Right.
So I guess I was sort of knocked out, but I can remember my screams, but I cannot remember or feel the pain or anything like that. But I ended up in hospital for 6 months.
6 months?
Because first of all, the leg was broken quite high up, so there was kind of no way I could do the traditional cast thing. So I was in traction there for 3 months. And then 2 doctors came along, and I was being seen by 2 doctors. I remember both their names too, but I won't name them. They were having a debate. Yeah, I think this leg is ready to come out. Okay. And the other one, I just don't think it is. Somehow we ended up going with the guy who thought it was good, and it wasn't, and it re-broke on the exit out of it. So I ended up redoing it and spent another 3 months
had to do the stint again.
And yes, as part of that, Greg Alexander, Steve Carter, both came and visited me in Nepean Hospital. I know Brandy, pretty well these days. I've never actually mentioned it to him,
right.
but I should give it a mention because it was great for me. Best experience ever as a kid for them. I remember when I could see them coming into the hospital, and I was like, oh, these guys are just doing a general tour. And then they came straight to me, and TV cameras were there. The ABC filmed it for their halftime show for, I think Penrith were playing Manly that weekend. I think they said, we'll win for you on the weekend. We got beat 40-10 or something like that. But good experience. And these, I always remember that when I think sometimes, I'm watching the ends of games, and I'm like, why is this kid getting a photo? Or why is this bloke getting a photo with this player? Like, just that stuff, and you're in the same boat.
Yes.
We kind of see these players on a much more regular basis these days doing this job. But I remember back to that, and I'm thinking that was just a true highlight. It's not something that you get to see every day, so yeah, it was good fun.
And obviously, obviously you remain close with the Panthers during that time, and I guess your obsession has even grown and grown over the years. But in the late 1990s, the internet was sort of taking off, wasn't it? We didn't have Facebook or Twitter or anything at the time, but the websites were bubbling out around there. But you being a computer geek, I guess you could say, and you had a bit of a affiliation with working at computer stores, you decided to launch a website or two websites. Yes. How did that come about? Because the internet was very complicated back then. I mean, these days websites are a little bit easier to make with templates and things. But tell me about that.
Yeah, this is where it all started, I guess. As far as if you want to pinpoint where does a media career begin, this is probably it. Look, to be honest with you, I have no idea how I figured it out on my own. I was most things computer-wise self-taught, and I still there's a lot I don't know, but somehow I figured it out. I used Microsoft Front Page. I remember that.
Right.
It was an old sort of what you see is what you get website editor. And yes, my first website I created was a Tina Arena fan page.
Okay.
Just so you know, Tina was very big at this time, right?
Late 1990s, Australia.
Late 90s. Don't Ask, In Deep, the big 2 albums. So a Tina Arena website was fair enough. But then I started a rugby league website called leagueaustralia.com.
Okay.
And it would just have news and whatever else, and it's just me writing it. So I presume I stole the content from other places. I mean, those days, I had zero idea about the things that we deal with today.
Well, that's what people do today, don't they? A lot of those blogs out there, still a bit of content.
But in the official sense these days, we're obviously very conscious of copyright and all those sort of things. But back then, just took this and then the team list had come out, I put that up and we started doing live scores, which back then was not something that was all that common. In fact, not even every game was broadcast live. You'd have your Channel 9 game would be on at 8:30, it'd kick off at 7:30, and same on Sundays and whatever else. But somehow, from listening to radio stations or whatever else, I'd do these live scores and the page would refresh every 30 seconds. And the website started to build itself a little reputation that it was going okay. And around this is the time where South Sydney were fighting to get back into the competition after being kicked out. And we were waiting on that sort of final big court decision, which ultimately, it didn't really let them back in the comp, but it paved the way for the NRL to say, all right, we accept that this needs to happen. And so my parents let me have the day off school because I need to cover it for LeagueAustralia.com. And I remember my dad calling because he'd just heard on 2UE that, there's in the Rabbitohs' favour, and, and I wrote it all up. And anyway, we got it out there really quickly. And there was another website running at the time called Ausleague.com. And Ausleague.com was pretty big because it ran Oztips.com, which at that time was the mega tipping kind of website that businesses would use and integrate their tipping. And Ausleague.com was going pretty good. It was the .com kind of era where things were going pretty good in that world. And they said, well, we'll buy LeagueAustralia.com from you for $1 and we'll give you a job at Ausleague.com, which I obviously accepted. Now, this is a couple of weeks before finishing school, so whatever path, I was probably in a deluded mind that I was going to go do journalism at uni, but I don't think I would have had the score to get in there. So literally, I finished, I think, my last exam on a Wednesday, and I started at Ausleague.com on the Monday. They shut LeagueAustralia.com, which I expected them to do, and I worked at Ausleague.com and got $25,000 a year. I remember that. I thought it was the greatest thing in the world. I had to go to North Sydney, though, every day, 5 days a week.
Wow.
And
just get the train in?
Yeah, just got the train in there. So what happened over the next 3 years, I guess, though, working at Ausleague and a couple of other places, Sports Data, the only place I've ever been fired from, and a couple of other places, is that I did my 3 years, I guess, on the tools versus someone at uni who was, obviously studying, and definitely have a lot of respect for the uni system. But what it meant was at the end of that 3 years, when I was trying to get jobs and whatnot, I was the guy who was able to say, hey, yes, I don't have the uni degree, but I've got the experience.
Right, yep.
I'm up against people who go, hey, I don't have the experience, but I've got the degree. And so it was I think I matched what they were offering by the fact that I'd had the experience. That was just the path I happened to take. These days, when we have a new journalist starting with us, it's 50-50, I'm more than happy to look at uni grads, but we look at the others as well, probably because I remember from that time, that I was doing it. So, yeah, it all started with an amateur website in my spare room at home.
And how did you, because you would have been in high school at the time, producing this website, how did you go with the hits? Like, how did you get the word out there? There's no Facebook, there's no Twitter to promote it. Like, how did people find out about League Australia and sort of go to you as the source for footy information?
Well, back in those days, there was a few ways. Firstly, links were so important. So you remember when you went to a website, you'd click links, and they all had links. So you'd have to contact the other rugby league websites. rleague.com was the mammoth website at the time. Right. So you go to rleague.com and you're putting the on there, and you would, and they would do that, and and then I contacted League Week. By then it was League Week, not Rugby League Week, and I think it went back to Rugby League Week. But League Week, Big League, all had little sections where they'd profile a website, and I managed to get in there a couple of times. You just found ways to do it. And then radio as well, continuous call team, places like that, you'd ask for a plug, and
they would give you a plug?
This was so new to them that we'll give this guy a plug, why not? So I remember getting a couple of plugs on continuous call as well. And it was just an interesting experience, but a really interesting time to learn on the ground, given I'd never done this before. Yeah. I remember doing a story, I covered the story for it, I think it was Ausleague at the time, when 2UE lost the NRL rights, and I sent an email inquiry to Ray Hadley. And I said, just wondering if you've got any comments or whatnot, and Ray rang. And that was my first time where someone rang me, and I'm like, well, this is someone who I've listened to my whole time. And I didn't believe it was him. It was one of those classic stories where people say, I didn't believe it was, he goes, that's Ray Hadley here. And I'm like, yeah. Okay.
Wow, okay.
And he starts talking away, and I'm like, crap, this is Ray Hadley, and I quickly, get out and
Get your
write
pen
it.
out, yeah.
So, because I had no idea how this industry worked. I had zero, and that's the thing that uni, I guess, does teach you that, you have to learn on the ground otherwise. No idea how this worked. No idea that I sent an email and he's going to call me and these are quotes that I can take. There's a big learning experience for sure.
So obviously you just mentioned there, in 2001, you leave Jamison High and you end up working for Oz League there. So was that a full-time gig?
Yeah, that was full-time. So I worked, I had Thursdays off so I could cover the games. They got me a Foxtel subscription and... that was, I'd cover the games on the weekend and things like that. But
so would you actually go to the games as well, or you just sit in your room and watch Foxtel?
Yeah, look, when I went to Sports Data, I mentioned before I got managed to get fired. When I went to Sports Data, that was the expectation, that they were thinking that I would go to games. And I went, well, for Oz League, I just got to cover these games off the TV.
Yeah,
and
right.
Like, no, you need to go to the press conference after and all this. And as I said, I'm learning all of this on the run. So it wasn't like today where... we can watch the press conferences like we know there's press conferences. Like I didn't even know there was a press conference after the game. So I remember, a couple of reasons I got fired from there were kind of related to that. Number one, I wasn't going to the games, and I was, I'm a 21-year-old or 19-year-old guy who wants to go to Panthers, and all of this sort of stuff. So I'd cover the game and I'd quickly I'd just go to Panthers, I'd go out with friends at Panthers, and then the next day they'd be like, Cliff Lyons got injured last night and you didn't cover it. And I'm like, I didn't know, and I was involved in, the typical thing that would interfere with a 19, 20-year-old guy that had a girlfriend and then didn't have a guy. It was all over the place, and I was letting that distract me. And so David Middleton, who's the stats guru who ran Sports Data, made the call. And Dave, if you're listening, I probably agree it was the right call to make. It was time for us to part ways.
So what ended up happening after your parting ways with Sports Data? Where did your sort of career path take you after that?
Well, in two separate ways, because I did start a theatre website. Talking of starting theatre websites, and by this time things have changed a little bit in the internet realm.
Internet is getting bigger.
Internet's getting bigger, and I had a friend who was wanting to audition for a show, and I said, "I'll look it up online. I'll find the details." I couldn't find the details of this show anywhere, so then I started to realise this industry doesn't have an actual, website, like a news website that drives content. It still is doing the classic, trying to get stories into papers, and all that sort of stuff. Yep. And I'm talking everything from your big musicals that are obviously on in the city and whatnot, right down to sort of your B grade and your what in America would be called off Broadway, things like that. So I said, I'll just do it. I know nothing about this industry.
So you weren't a musical goer as growing up?
I think I saw Joseph in his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, but no, not at all.
Wow, okay.
And so I had zilch idea about this industry.
Yeah.
And I said, I'll just do it. And I said, you know what I'll do? I'll make it tabloid style, as in we're going to be gossipy and we're going to be we're going to break stories. And this shocked the theatre industry in a way because they had not dealt with this before. So, for example, let's say a show's coming out and they're going to announce who the lead in the show is. Traditionally, we'll put a press release out, we'll have a big announcement. No one's going to care about breaking this story, so we'll get we'll control it the way we want to control it. Well, obviously, as the website started to grow, I would get leaks and things like that, so we just, this person's cast, we'll leak it. And it totally frazzled PR people who were not used to dealing with this. They were not used to dealing with stories being leaked and things like that. But there was a craving for it, both from within the industry itself, which loves gossiping about itself, excuse me, and also... from the core theatre supporters and followers who didn't really have anything like that before. So got myself in a lot of trouble because we would break stories, there was feuds everywhere, there was things like that, but there was also a recognition that this site was really taking off. And probably over for the next decade, Aussie Theatre was the premier theatre news source in the country, without question. So... but it was a busy time because a news show would generally open every Thursday night, whether it's a major musical or a play, and I often took on a lot of those myself to go and review. We built a good team, in a state team as well, mainly of volunteer writers and things like that, because it did make a little bit of money, but not a lot. But yeah, it dominated life for the next sort of 5 to 10 years. Very very popular. Surprised at how popular it became. I look back on some of that content now and go, how didn't my lack of knowledge about the history of this business not get caught along the way? Because some of the stuff I write, I'm like, what are you doing? You know, but the whole point was to give theatre something it hadn't have. So a totally weird concept for them, which was, a site that actually broke stories and actually gossiped about them and actually did hard-hitting stuff that they weren't used to seeing and doing. But also offering them a new way of promoting their shows, which they didn't have before. So, an interesting ride. And at the same time, obviously needed to make money. So, got my first print job around this time, which was at the Blacktown City Guardian newspaper.
Well, are they still around now, Troy?
They're not now, no. I don't think the Guardian's around. So, I was the... I'm a bit of an all-rounder, I think, there. I did the entertainment round.
Okay.
So what was happening there at the Blacktown
Did you focus
Workers
a lot
Club
of theatre productions in that thing? Or
yeah,
did you pick that
well, this is the first... I guess, what I could always say is I've always managed to cross a lot of my interests over and make them about work. You know, I mentioned rugby league. Well, rugby league's a big part of what the Weekender does. And yes, at the time I was doing Aussie theatre, so I was able to... to put some theatre stuff into Blacktown City Guardian as well. It was a funny newspaper in that it ran as like a classic local newspaper. Only one computer had the internet.
Okay.
So you had a computer obviously to write your stories, but if you needed the internet, you had to go.
So like at the library or at school, you have to wait your turn to get onto the computer.
You'd have to wait your turn. And here I was at this time trying to run Aussie theatre as well. So I'd be like, I need to check my Aussie theatre. You didn't have email on your phone.
No Wi-Fi or anything like that.
No Wi-Fi, none of that. If you wanted, in those days, if you wanted to say to staff, look, you can't look at social media, too easy. Like, you could either block it on the computers or, there was no Wi-Fi to just do it yourself on your phone. So, you had to wait your turn, and I was trying to run Aussie Theatre at the same time, so I'd log into my Aussie Theatre email and upload a story and all of this sort of stuff, while at the same time, writing my Blacktown stuff. We were big on food stories, as we are now, because we know food stories rate so well for online, but for print, we're big on food stories. I'd have to go and do a restaurant review every week in Blacktown.
Right, okay.
I tell you what, I don't know if it's an Indian restaurant on Main Street, Blacktown. One of the great Indian restaurants.
Yes, we know. That's a separate podcast, Troy. Troy's favourite Indian restaurants. That'll come up in another episode.
But it was a good time. And that was kind of my first introduction to the Weekender as well, because it had an affiliation with the Blacktown Guardian. So that's where my sort of first foray with the Weekender began, really.
So to put a bow on Aussie theatre, that obviously ran for quite a long time, and
still runs today,
and still runs today. But where did you end your affiliation with that?
So I reckon that was about 2011, 2012, somewhere in there, where it was just becoming pretty apparent that it was too time consuming to do.
Yeah.
So at the time, and I'm sure we'll go back and talk about it, I was doing radio here in Penrith. I was starting to work with the newspaper as well, and just going out every Thursday night to do the shows and keeping the sites up to date, just couldn't do it. I could probably do it now, because things are so much quicker these days with being able to update websites and whatnot. But I remember you used to have to, if I had to update the site, then I would have to save a copy of the page on the computer and then make sure I updated it when I got back home, because it wasn't WordPress like that these days. So it was just so time consuming. So I had a deputy editor at the time, and she ended up buying the website, and she's recently sold it as well. So it's probably been online. I think in 2023, next year, it'll celebrate 20 years online. But it is very different today. Along the way, it lost its tabloid style, which I think was its driving force. Yeah. But perhaps these days with social media and whatnot, its time to be tabloid was back then and not now. So.
Right. So you mentioned you work with the Blacktown Guardian, and you said they had an affiliation with the Weekender. So how did that sort of cross over, where you went from there in Blacktown to being based here in Penrith with the Weekender? Yeah,
basically the Weekender did the production for the Blacktown City Guardian. So because I lived in Penrith, the idea was, well, we need to get the files to Penrith to print. And because we only had one computer that was probably operating on, a really poor connection, I would literally get this bag, this massive bag, and it would have all the proofs in it and some CDs, I think, in it. And that was how we got the content from Black. And I feel like we're talking about 1970. This is not that long ago. This is the mid-2000s, But there wasn't a system in place, I guess, that we were a bit behind in that regard, or the Guardian was anyway. The systems just weren't in place. So literally I would drive it here to the Weekender, drop them off in the afternoon and pick things up again the next morning, and then go to Blacktown. And then, I ended up here at the Weekender. The editor, Bernard Bertusa, was looking for someone to fill a job, so along I came, and it was the first of, I guess, 3 separate stints with the Weekender. But at that time, I did entertainment, bit of sport, and other bits and pieces, and rugby league previews and things like that. So
you would have been, what, your early 20s at the time?
Yeah, I'm in the early 20s at that stage, yeah.
And then, obviously, in 2008,
Yes.
you joined Kick FM, which was Penrith's local radio station at the time. We've had a few stations here in town then.
We have.
And you were the drive announcer. So how did that come about? Because obviously you had that big love affair for radio growing up, but how did you sort of get back into that whilst at the same time doing your thing with the Weekender?
Yeah, so the Weekender owned Kick FM. In 2007, it launched Kick FM on the 87.6 frequency, and the Weekender didn't really have any involvement with it per se. It launched with Jason Bowman and Amanda Flynn were hosting the breakfast show.
Yep.
Kerry Denton, really experienced radio guy, was doing mornings. David Archer was doing drives. All experienced radio people.
From the Penrith area at the time.
Yeah, from the Penrith area. Somehow things blew up. I'm guessing maybe there was a bit of an overarch in budget for that for what was a local radio station, and all of a sudden this whole on-air team was kicked out one day, and the call went out. Well, we think we're gonna do it all from in-house through the Weekender. So obviously, I can't remember who approached who. If I said no, I'll do it, or they said, do you want to do it? But I was super keen to do it, obviously, and so I got handed the drive show from 2 till 7, and sometimes I listen back to it, and I'm not trying to blow, so I go, you know what, it's not that bad, because I'd had so much experience in listening to, say, talk radio and things like that I kind of knew a fair bit about how it operated and whatnot, and so we did 2 till 7 playing music, doing interviews. We had everyone from the premiers online. Barry O'Farrell, I remember, came online. We talked to Mick Leary, who was the CEO of Panthers at the time, and hosted that for a little over a year before, or maybe even 2 years before things went belly up. But it was a great time. Kick operated by the seat of its pants, but also, skirting the lines of what was allowed and wasn't allowed. And we didn't know this. As on-air announcers, I had no idea what we were allowed to do or what we weren't allowed to do, because they were quite happy just to do everything that you want to do. But I think we, as far as what was a narrowcast license, I think we bent the rules a fair bit, but I just did what I was told to do and hosted the show and called an NRL game or two from the stands that we weren't allowed to do.
How did that come about? Because obviously these days it's obviously a very strict thing. You don't have the rights to the NRL. You shouldn't be calling them. So how does Kick FM start calling it an NRL game?
Yeah, without the rights, the call goes to me and says, you know what, we want to start calling the Panthers games. And I'm smart enough at this point to know, I think you kind of need some official rights to do this. I mean,
so you knew the rules.
Well, I at least knew that 5 or 6 years earlier, the whole 2GB, 2UE debacle had happened. Yeah. And by this stage, I think we're in the world where Triple M's calling Monday Night Footy. So, things like I kind of knew where things are supposed to be at. And they're like, no, we want you to call it. Just call it from the stands on a phone. So I turn up at Shark Park.
With your Nokia?
And probably with an old... I don't know how it lasted, to be honest. I turn up at Shark Park and I find a seat and, I basically call the game.
Binoculars?
No, just in those days I had pretty good eyesight, I think.
Okay.
And called the game, and it was so bad, and they said, this is good, because we think if it's bad, the NRL won't really notice, just let it happen. And I remember that I was with someone, I can't even remember who it was, who came with me, and they were like, buy me a drink here, and, and whatever else, so I could, just keep calling, and they came back and said, Troy, no more hot dogs left. And I made a big deal of that for the next few minutes on the broadcast, where they're out of hot dogs here at Shark Park, and all of this, and did that a couple of times, and then I don't know if the NRL maybe got wind of it or whatever else, but it turned into updates. These updates would go for 5 or 10 minutes. I did them for a long time. Michael Todd, who's now the CEO of 1 Point Health, was also the NRL updater at one point. It was a weird time, a great time. I loved it. I loved, you'd rock into work here at 12 or 1 o'clock and do the drive show, and I drove around in the Kick FM car and really enjoyed it at the time. But looking back on it, there was no chance it was a long-term survival for Kick FM, because it just wasn't set up to succeed, unfortunately.
Yeah. So how did that all end? Because Penrith, it loves radio and that sort of thing, but this seemed to be quite a big popular station at the time, covering local stories and local people. But how did it all sort of fizzle out in the end?
Yeah. So one day we look at the back page of the Daily Telegraph, and the Sydney Spirit basketball team has collapsed. And this was important. The Sydney Spirit. And this was important to us. This was the old Western Sydney Razorbacks. They become the Spirit.
Yep. Okay.
During this time, I think the Kings maybe disappeared as well, and so
Yeah,
this,
the NBL went through a bit of a turmoil during that period.
Well, oddly enough, the Weekender owned the Sydney Spirit basketball team.
So did you play for them as well?
No, I didn't play for them, but some of the guys had come in to the Weekender office to make some membership phone calls. So they'd ring the like it was an interesting time.
Operation. Yeah.
And so yes, think about this: you've got a media organisation that is running a newspaper, a radio station, and a basketball team. The basketball team collapses, and I guess, to be honest with you, I still don't know the ins and outs of whatever else, but the best way to explain it is that the radio station and the newspaper were collateral damage for the collapse of that basketball team, which left a lot of debt behind it. And there's a whole bunch of stories that I won't go into around that time, but basically it meant that the radio station was gone, and ultimately I think the license was sold to Wayne Wilmington, who ultimately started Vintage FM. So at that point, I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll stick around and I'll get to do what I'm doing now on Vintage FM. Also, at the same time, the Weekender was caught up in all of this. So it was purchased as well by a group within Penrith, 6-7 business people, as well as our printers at Spot Press, all sort of chipped in and bought it. So I kind of had two situations emerging. Well, like, hopefully I'll stay here at Vintage, but maybe something's happening at the Weekender. Wilmo gave me the call. I remember I was in Myer in Penrith, and I took the phone call, and Wilmo said, long and the short of it is, you're not sticking around hosting the drive show here. So that was all good. I didn't necessarily, wasn't pinning all of my hopes on that.
Yep.
Wilmo had other plans, and for Vintage, and Vintage obviously took off over the next few years. The opportunity came up for me to basically return to the Weekender and become its editor. At that point, I guess I'm 25. This is, 2010, something like that.
Yeah.
No, even younger probably. Now, Bernard Bertusa was the editor at the time. Originally Bernard was going. He wasn't. There was a lot of mystery over what was happening there.
Yep.
So I had some tough calls to make as well, because I obviously knew and got on with Bernard really, really well, but the opportunity was presented to me. Started as the acting editor. Became the editor, and the rest is history, I guess. But it was a tumultuous time, because the Weekender was, for a while there, the Weekender wasn't running. It was running as the Weekly View.
Right.
And all of the staff of the actual Western Weekender, which was in receivership at the time, given the collapse and everything like that, all of the staff resigned and just happened to join the Weekly View, which kept running with the same staff, because there was some issues in getting the masthead and whatever else. About 8 or 9 weeks in, masthead secured, and the Weekender returned with all of that staff. So
around 25 years old, you become the editor of the Western Weekender. Now that's quite young when we think about it now. Like to be the editor of such an iconic and big paper in Penrith and in Western Sydney. Were you prepared for taking that on?
Look, yes and no. I was pretty confident, based on the radio station, I'd been able to build up a lot of contacts and things like that, and based on the paper's reputation itself, and based on the fact that I'd worked at the paper before. So I knew the systems and how they operated. I knew a lot of the staff. So it was difficult, and there are times where I probably didn't know exactly what I was doing, and again, had to learn on the run, that side of it now, the business side of it, more than anything else. And very much learnt during that time to just adapt to how things are happening, because everything was changing, and we went through some ownership changes and bits and pieces and all of this sort of stuff. But it was probably a difficult time, but one that allowed me to go, well, where do we go with the Weekender? And journos had often talked about wanting the Weekender. At that time, the Weekender was still the good news newspaper.
Right.
Nothing bad happened in Penrith was the philosophy, and I think we'd moved on. We needed to move on from that, and I made the call. I said, we need to become true local newspaper. There's, unfortunately, there is bad stuff that happens around here as well, and so began the ride of taking the Weekender from the number 3 paper in town to number 1.
And obviously during that time, media, the technology in media was changing rapidly as well. I mean, Facebook and in Twitter and Instagram and all those social media things were starting to take off. The Weekender website was also probably starting to bubble away and getting better and bigger as well. So how did you sort of go from being a print newspaper to sort of, adapting to these newer methods of getting the word out and getting the news out, I guess?
Well, we used to update the website once a week.
Once a week?
On a Thursday with the 3 best stories of the week we'd come up with.
Wow,
and
okay.
that's the way we'd do it. And But yeah, no, eventually we obviously launched a news website. We launched the socials. And the interesting thing about Facebook, I think, was that we jumped onto that pretty early, but the Weekender would just basically grab thousands of followers every time there was a storm or every time, things like that were happening, because I was just so entrenched in it. My now wife was working at the Sydney Morning Herald, and she was working a night shift.
Right.
So she'd work from 4 till midnight, so I didn't really have anything to do at night. So I'd still stay at work or I'd do whatever else, and literally, if there was a nose-to-tail accident on the corner of, Abel Street and Regentville Road, I was onto it, and we were going everywhere. So we still do that, but we built a very strong reputation at that time that, hey, the Weekender's Facebook is where you need to go if there's if there's something happening and you want to know what it is. And then over time, we start saying, well, actually, print and digital, it's not about them fighting against each other. It's about that we can make them, live together, so we basically run not only the print edition, but then the full news website as well.
Yeah, and I will touch on the fact that, since you've been editor of the Western Weekender, I know we've had, it's always been known as a Penrith Panthers paper, and we always have a heavy rugby league coverage. But since you've obviously been in charge, that's obviously expanded over the years with contacts at the club and things like that. And now we produce a 16-page rugby league magazine every week during the season. So that must be a great way for you to go back to your passions and be able to write about Panthers and rugby league every week, and similar to what you were doing, as you broke into the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the thing about the Weekender is it has constantly had the reputation of being the rugby league paper in Penrith. Its first edition in 1991 had John Cartwright on the cover, saying this is the year, and it turned out that it was. But yeah, we actually had a fractured relationship when I took over as editor of the Weekender. There was a very fractured relationship as far as the Panthers and the Weekender is concerned. That was dating back to the Weekender's coverage of the Roger Cowan dramas, and the inquiry, the government inquiry into the club, and the Weekender probably taking the anti-Panthers approach during that time. There was all sorts of dramas. The club wouldn't let us sponsor them and all sorts of things. So we had to rebuild the relationships. So that was my first couple of years were really all about that. We weren't necessarily about getting, better access or coverage or whatever else. The Weekender had always maintained its coverage during that time of Panthers, even during those bad times when access was
They would
was
still
not
do
allowed.
game reports. And
Still do, Mick Kelly, a former player, actually used to write the match previews.
Right,
and,
okay.
Mark Guy was a columnist for a while, and Daryl Broman came on board. So we still had those kind of big names and things like that, but it was a difficult time. But over time, we managed to rebuild the relationships, launched Extra Time as a proper lift out, and now have a great relationship with Panthers and built that over time. And I think we've got a pretty good rugby league reputation, obviously with yourself and a lot of columnists and contributors doing it as well. But yeah, it is fun. I'd always wanted to be here when we won a premiership and cover the premiership. We did it in a weird way with the pandemic, but fantastic to be part of the coverage of the 2021 GF.
Well, in 2015, Troy, the Weekender gets new ownership. And what was managing that process like? Because, whenever new people come on board, you expect a lot of change and things like that. But tell me how you sort of handled that as the editor at the time.
Yes, Catherine Garton, of course, our current CEO and owner, bought it in 2015. The whispers were around, I guess, that the Weekender was looking at being purchased. But a few weeks before it all happened, I went to a meeting with Catherine and Charles, our former CEO, and Catherine was pretty adamant that she only wanted to sign on the dotted line if I was sticking around. So that was a good confidence boost in me. I knew I could manage the process knowing that it's not about am I still going to be here or not be here. So that part was good. The next part was obviously managing the next 3 to 4 weeks of a big change coming up, and it was a significant change. So basically, it was spent not telling anyone and doing everything behind the scenes to prepare for this switch over to Western Sydney Publishing Group. It was actually a pretty seamless and pretty smooth transition, really. the biggest thing you've got to deal with is telling everyone when it's happening at the time and how everyone's going to react, and everyone thinks that things are going to be different. In the end, I think things were different for the good and for the better. So it was an interesting period, but yeah, she's our current owner. It's worked out really well, and a great relationship there, and allowed the paper to basically run with the people who know what they're doing best to continue doing it, and I think that's been what's critical.
And our Christmas parties have certainly improved over that time as well, Troy. Now along the way, obviously, the media landscape changes, in the ensuing years, and we farewell a lot of local competition as well. The Penrith Press and the Star, they were, or the Gazette as well. They were huge papers in town at the time, but unfortunately, over the years, those papers have sort of have stopped and have ended. And what's your sort of view on that? And seeing that the Weekend has managed to thrive during that time, and when we've seen other papers, fall by the wayside.
Yeah, look, really interesting. First of all, because I guess at the start of when I was editing the paper, the competition was still that was the biggest thing. We were the number 3 paper in town. There were times when the Weekender was really just happy to survive. The Penrith Press was the clear number 1. Penrith Star was second, and we were third. We slowly started to make ground over those first few years, mainly because we decided, no, we are going to be a real news newspaper.
Yep.
We did the better league coverage. We came up with a whole new bunch of ideas and things like that. So we started to make ground. I can remember I used to drive to Panthers every Wednesday night at about 9 o'clock, because that was the first drop-off of the Penrith Press. So the first bundle of the Penrith Press would arrive for the next day's edition, and obviously we were up against them specifically on this day. And I had to get down there to see what they put on the front page, to see what we missed it, and did we miss anything? What did they run? Because that was still such a critical time at that point, where these days, obviously, we're pretty much the only ones running anything. So that didn't matter as much in the end. But yeah, that was really critical. The competition was pretty crazy, particularly with us in the press. There was a definite competition there.
It was like a rivalry sort of thing.
There's definitely a rivalry. I remember
their journos and our journos.
Brad Earl, who I think's still around at News Corp, he was running the paper at the time, and we had to. I've always wondered, and I'd love to talk to people at News Corp about this. Yeah. I always felt that News Corp had the power to kill us off if they wanted to.
Right.
Like at the end of the day, we were running with an independent sales team, an independent news team, without the resources of News Corp. News Corp could have, if they really wanted to, brought 10 sales reps into that office in Penrith, or they could have flooded it with journos and covered absolutely everything and all of that sort of stuff. But they never really did. And in fact, if nothing else, they went the other way, and they'd start to centralize content. And that's the minute that they moved to Parramatta. For most of their stuff, it was done, and even from a sales perspective, I know you can say you can centralize sales, no one really know, all that sort of stuff, but you need the ability of a client to go, I can literally ring a local office and I can talk to them and I can book an ad and all of this sort of stuff. So yeah, the Penrith Star went first. It became the Penrith Gazette for a while.
And then
it
a few
went.
Name changes. Yep.
The Penrith Press held on all the way through to the pandemic, and then I think the pandemic was an opportunity to sort of say, well, let's pause printing, and then they just never came back.
It was getting thinner and thinner as the months went on and the weeks went on.
Which is the traditional way you kind of tell how a newspaper is doing.
Yeah.
If it was 100 pages one week and it's 50 the next, well, you know that something's not quite right. But for them, and I'm quite happy to say this, it is totally on them. It's on there. It's totally on them. It's not about the audience changed and wanted digital. Well, that's not true, because that audience, if they wanted that content, it's behind a paywall in the Daily Telegraph. So I don't think any of them was saying, yes, we want to do it digitally and we want to pay $30 a month to do it. That wasn't the case at all. They did it to themselves. They pulled journos out of Penrith. They pulled sales reps out of Penrith. They tried to do it all out of Parramatta, and it just didn't work. And even now they run a digital presence where half the things aren't actually about Penrith. And I guess I'm not here just to bash News Corp or whatever else. In fact, I'm a proud News Corp subscriber. I've got no issues, no issues with that. I think there's some great people there, but I think that they will probably tell the story that the audience changed. I think they actually changed, and we emerged as a success story. If you went back 20 years, 30 years, and said the Weekender is the one of the three here that's going to survive, you would have been put in a straitjacket somewhere. But here we are, and we are the lone survivor. And all due respect to our friends, of course, at the Nepean News, but they kind of run a different game than us. But yeah, we're still here and powering along.
Well, thanks to you, Troy. I think I will, blow smoke up your ass this time, but I think you're a big part of the Weekender and keeping it alive during, some rough periods. But I don't think it would be thriving without you. But obviously, in the mix of all of this, Troy, you also work extensively in radio, and
Yep.
I know you've been on air on 2UE and 2GB over the years. Even Nova, you dabbled in there, did a bit of stuff with them. But tell me about your stint at 2UE. I know there was a pretty tough night during in 2014 that sort of was a very memorable experience for you in your radio career.
Yeah, so I was doing just some weekend fill-in shifts on news and sport, mainly sport, which I do now at 2GB still. So, you read your 90 seconds of sport and whatever else, and good fun. Really enjoyed doing it. But I said to Clinton Maynard, who was the program director at the time, I said, I really want to do programs. I've grown up listening to programs, and programs is what I want to do. So at the time, he was like, look, and this is the thing, 2UE at that point had lost its number one rating some time ago when Alan Jones and Ray Hadley left. So 2UE was at a period where it was ripe for the picking as far as, having an opportunity there. And so Clinton said, well, look, I've got some shifts coming up, midnight to dawn. Do you want to do those? And I said, absolutely I do. In fact, first of all, I did a Christmas Day shift. I think Christmas Day 2013 was my first shift. And no one has prepared more for one shift, a single shift. I think that I was in there pre-recording things and getting things,
getting guests, and
the
everything.
Classic nervous sort of first shift on air, and knew that friends and my wife, everyone would be listening, and that I remember a guy called in probably 2 minutes into the show, and the fact that I got a call, I was like, this is all good, it's all going to be okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did the mid to dawn for a period, so midnight to 5 a.m, and this is a crazy time to be in talk radio because there are a lot of listeners, and those listeners are from a whole diverse range of people. You've got truck drivers out there working, shift workers out there working. You've got people working in restaurants just heading home. You've got nurses just starting their day. You've got people who can't sleep.
Yeah.
You've got all of these different people who are listening. Definitely some crazy callers at that time of night as well. But I just tried to present it as if I was presenting it at any other time during the day, and I'd use, once again, managing to cross things over, I'd use a lot of my weekender contacts to appear on the show, so to do different interviews and whatnot. But yeah, that night in 2014 that you're referring to is the Sydney Siege. So I remember, obviously this had started to unfold in the morning there at the Limp Cafe.
We were in the office at the time.
We were in the office, and so during this time I was doing mid to dawns and still at the Weekender. So the point was that I said to our owners at the time, look, I want to do this. The Weekender won't suffer.
Yeah.
I'll make it happen. Somehow I did for this 2 or 3 week period. And I remember Clinton called me about midday, and he goes, "You're obviously aware of what's happening." And I'm like, "Yeah, this call is going to be, hey, we're taking you off the air tonight.
We're getting the big guns in.
We're going to get the big guns in." And Clinton said, "Look, we've got a feeling it's probably still going to be going. Anyway, we'll see how you go." And basically it was, look, you're going to do this and you're going to cover it. And as it happened, it all ended at about 2 a.m. The following morning. So I was on air as it happened.
So you're watching this,
watching
you're
it
the
all on the monitors.
Yep.
We got a reporter there. We had a reporter there, and I was just commentating. I've still got the audio from it, commentating it as it's happening, and it gives you, respect for. And journos get battered from pillar to post on TV and radio and all this sort of stuff. But
Yep.
it definitely gave me that newfound respect for that live coverage of a tragedy like that, because you were watching things and you're like, who is this? Is this person a hostage? Is this person a gunman who's running? Or what? Like, remember people were running from the scene and whatnot. And it was just a crazy, crazy morning, full of adrenaline. But you are, in a sense, you're on your own just there in that studio, and whatever you're saying is what everyone's listening to. I remember I decided the best thing to do was to reset the day. So when I came on at midnight, I basically spent the first hour just going back through the day. Okay, Tony Abbott addressed the nation at midday, here's what he said, and all of that sort of stuff. So I could reset for everyone and then cover from there. And then I remember the Parks Elvis Festival was coming up.
Right.
So we got to about 2 o'clock, and don't forget, this has been going since 8 in the morning.
Yeah, so you've got other content going as
I
well.
had other full show planned.
Yeah, right.
It's getting towards 2 o'clock, and I'm like, like we're just repeating the same things. Like, nothing is really changing. So I make this grand announcement. Well, after the 2 o'clock news, we're going to have our Elvis hour. covering the, we're going to talk to an Elvis impersonator and
at 2 a.m. in the morning.
At 2 a.m. and this is all going to be good. And this Elvis impersonator's got up ready for his interview. And then as we go to the news at 2 o'clock, things start really unfolding and the police move into the Link Cafe. And so obviously we never did the Elvis impersonator in that show at least. And then it was literally just covering and trying to figure out, okay, I might take the Channel 9 coverage here, I might take the 10 coverage here. And when you do that, when people do that in radio, it's always tricky because you don't know, like, is Carl Stefanovic going to come over the top here of, they don't, you hope, let's just watch it without it. So you do a quick credit there and credit this that you're taking this and then go to our reporter and whatnot. But yeah, definitely a memorable time to be on the air. And yeah, over the next couple of years, I did a lot of those shifts at 2UE, some weekend shifts and some night shifts filling in for different people, and love it. Absolutely love doing talk radio, and never know, might do it again one day.
And even now, Troy, I know you still dabble in radio, and in particular with 2GB, you work over there on some weekends, and you're doing the sport and that sort of thing. So can you sort of tell me a bit about how that sort of plays out? You do your weekender shifts during the week, and then you're always working, it seems to be. Yeah,
well, I wanted to keep my foot in the door. It was pretty clear that Clinton Maynard he came across to 2GB in the whole 2GB buys 2UE thing, and that's a whole other story. But he came across, but it was pretty clear that he wasn't going to be the program director, and basically I was at ground zero again. So I had felt at the time that this is going really well. You never know, I might be able to pick up something permanent. And at that stage, I'm only a couple of years into the weekender role. I'm in the mindset of, you put a couple of years in there, and maybe radio is the next thing. It was pretty clear that, okay, when you go to 2GB, if I rang up 2GB and I said, where do I fit in here? I've been doing casual shifts, and they basically said, you don't. So that's fine. I mean, you've got Alan Jones, Ray Hadley, Chris Smith, John Stanley. You've got a pretty strong lineup. So, there's probably nowhere I'm fitting in there. The newsroom obviously runs a bit separately and a bit independently of programs, so I put a call in there to Aaron Marr, who was the news director at the time, and I said, look, I'd still love to do shifts. Clinton will vouch for me if you like, and he did, and since then, basically, whenever they've needed me, I try and do one weekend a month, or sometimes 2 weekends a month, just filling in, doing sport, normally when someone's sick or injured, and just keeps me in tune with the station, how it works, all that sort of thing. So I enjoy doing it.
You've even been on air with the continuous call team and that sort of thing during shifts with them.
Sports crosses with the two Murrays and all those guys. So it's a lot of fun. I enjoy doing it, and it's just a bit of something a bit different to do as well.
Now, obviously, in our job, it does come with a lot of criticism. I mean, journalists, we work very hard, but we do also cop it a fair bit, and you're no strangers to that as well, Troy. Particularly recently in the election, I mean, you'd put your opinion pieces out online and on Facebook, and you'd get a few trolls there that obviously disagree with you or think that you're biased and things like that. You certainly do cop it, and one thing I know about you, it's sort of an order for ducks back for you. I mean, I don't know how you do it. You're one of the toughest skinned person I know out there, but can you sort of take me into your mind, and when you see some criticism out there, or when people are criticising your job or your opinion, how do you sort of deal with that?
Yeah, well, as you say, it is water for ducks back to me. You'd be able to vouch for that. The personal stuff, the trolls, the little online bullies, all that sort of stuff, the comments that people make, literally does not faze me or bother me in the slightest. And I would never criticise someone who does bother. I know that there's obviously people out there, and no question that cyberbullying is a huge issue that we still need to do more on, and the social media companies need to do a lot more on. But for me, it just doesn't impact me, doesn't affect me. In fact, the ones I would say that actually do make me go, stop and think, are the coherent ones, are the ones that, someone's actually took the time to either email, mainly it's email, Facebook tends to be not for that, but even on Facebook, if I read a comment and I go, that person makes a lot of sense, I didn't think about that side of it, or, okay, that's a fair rebuttal, or whatever else. They're the ones that make me think, the other ones, not at all. Where it probably bothers me is the paper itself being criticised, or the newsroom itself, or whatever else, because just like any industry that we might criticise, you might criticise a restaurant or a cafe or whatever else, most of that criticism comes from the outside of people who have no idea how the media works and how the business of the media works, and how the behind the scenes of exactly why something happened, why there's 4 Liberal stories and only 2 Labor stories. They don't know that. They you know, and I kind of can't blame people for that, because I don't know how a delivery service works, but I'll still blame them if my, you know, Uber Eats is 20 minutes late. Yeah. But, you know, and I don't appreciate the behind the scenes of it. But yeah, media is obviously a lot more public, and they just don't quite grasp how it works behind the scenes, and that results in some pretty harsh criticism, when in reality, just like the vast majority of truck drivers are good drivers, the vast majority of journalists are good people who do the right things, and particularly at the Weekender as well, who operate behind all of the policies and all of the right methods that we're supposed to do things in. Unfortunately, the criticism is never going to go out. Criticism of the press has existed forever, but I think these days it just takes a bit of a ferocious turn with social media and whatnot. But let me tell you, you're better off having us than not having us, because if places like the Weekender don't exist, or news sites don't exist, or newspapers don't exist, as much as everyone wants to criticise News Corp, who run so much content across things, if they don't exist, then all you're left with is PR people and businesses that are controlling their own message. And if you think that is a good thing, let me tell you, it's not, because you need people who are going to question things. You need people who are going to bring things up that, this isn't right. Let's question this. And it's harder than ever, because yes, companies hire PR people to spin the message, and that's another thing people don't see. They don't see that, hey, we want an answer on this, and people literally are putting up roadblocks so you don't get an answer on this. Yeah. It's a really difficult thing, and people don't appreciate that. They just comment on the end result. But look, we're here to be criticised. And as far as my stuff goes, I always look at it that if I'm putting out an opinion, everyone has a right to disagree with that. Even if sometimes they're accusing me of doing something that they are doing in their very criticism. They're saying you are biased, generally coming from someone who is from a position of bias. But anyway, it is what it is.
And people should always click on the story and read the full story or the full opinion piece before
I can tell you right now that I reckon the vast majority of comments on, and look, this isn't a Weekender problem. This is you can go on any Facebook page, Panthers, NRL, whatever else. People just not reading the context of things and just deciding they're going to comment on it is it's ridiculous.
Now, just before we wrap up, I do have to ask one question. Obviously, we've spoken a lot about what you do and how many jobs you sort of juggle at the one time. Obviously, you're working the Weekender 5 days a week. Here in the early mornings, you finish late, and then obviously some weekends you're working at 2GB and doing their sport coverage and things like that. But you also last year welcomed a baby daughter into the world, Edie, and there's a lot of juggling with that as well. Yep. You're juggling a baby and a newborn as well, being up all hours of the night. How do you function, Troy? How do you manage to juggle a baby, radio, the newspaper, and everything else that comes with that?
Yeah, look, and I guess this isn't for everyone. I wouldn't say this is the way everyone can approach it, because everyone's jobs will be different. But for me, I've always merged, and I'm sure that there would be some expert out there who would tell you this is the worst thing you could do. I've always merged the personal and the professional, right? So my calendar is for both. The calendar in my phone says that I've got this on at 8 o'clock, dinner with people at 8 o'clock tonight, but it's also got that I've got a meeting at 2 o'clock this afternoon. What that has allowed me to do, because I do get here early or I'm here late or whatever else, is that if I need to do something during the day, I can quickly do it or whatever else. So merging the two things and just making it all one big life in one big bucket has probably made things a lot easier. It means that I've got an hour here at 11 o'clock at night that I can punch out some stuff that I can do for work. So being able to merge those two things has actually made it work for me. I couldn't go down the path that I'm sure a psychologist out there would tell me to do, which is, when you leave that office, it needs to shut down and, then do this family time here and work time here. It just doesn't work like that. I'm fortunate enough that I've been here such a long time that I have a lot of flexibility from our owner, Catherine, from the perspective of there's an appreciation there that, Troy's writing a story at midnight, so if he needs to look after Edie at 4:30 in the afternoon, that's okay as well. Yeah. So, it helps that I guess that I've been here a long time and that I can set things up to operate knowing how they operate, because I am learning new things every day, of course, because we're covering new things every day. But We've set up a lot of systems over the years that make things quicker. We used to put the paper to print at midnight on Wednesday nights. Now it'd be very rare that it's still going to print after 5 o'clock. And it's just all about systems and putting things in place. But yeah, as far as juggling it is concerned, well, I've never been a big sleeper anyway. 4 to 5 hours a night will do me. And yeah, it's just about combining everything. Works for me.
And I guess it also helps that your wife, Stacey, was also in the industry as well. So she sort of knows what the journalism game is like.
100%. Yeah, there's an understanding there that, yes, these calls happen at 8 o'clock at night or stories happen at midnight and whatever else. And just on that as well, one of my passions is obviously the footy, but the footy has become my work. So it's all about, as I said, it's all about everything's in the one bucket. And there's very few things I almost do from a personal perspective that don't somehow link into work in one way or another. So, I'm a big country music fan. Oh, let's do a country music column. Suddenly, we'll make things, I make things sort of combine. And that's what keeps my passion and energy up as well, because I'm like, well, now I am literally doing something I love doing because I'm combining them all together.
Absolutely. Now, Troy, I know this is a question that you always finish on when you do the podcast with your usual guests, and I know it's something you've been thinking about all morning before we recorded this, but the question everyone wants to know, Troy, how would you like to be remembered in Penrith?
I'm actually thinking about dumping this question because now I'm like, it is a really hard question to answer. You know what? I think at the end of the day, from a few different perspectives, I would like to be remembered as someone who gave a lot of young journalists their first gig, because that is definitely the case, and there's some journos out there now doing great things in metro media, so I'd like to remember from that perspective. But otherwise, just someone who was very passionate about Penrith and about telling Penrith stories in the most positive light that we could, and shining a light on the fact that living here is a great choice and something that you can really take a lot of enjoyment and fun out of, and not a chore, which a lot of people I think over the years have looked at it as, I live in Penrith and I'm not proud of it. Hopefully some of the things I've done have made living in Penrith be a bit more, a bit happier and a bit more pride attached to it. So I'll go with that.
Well, hopefully, Troy, Penrith never loses you and your talents and everything you've done, because, I think it'll be a poorer place without you around. But thank you for joining us on the podcast
maybe you can
today.
Host it permanently if you want to. All good.
Well, I hope you enjoyed our chat, everyone. On the Record is produced by the Western Weekender. To hear future episodes with Troy at the helm, I'm sure, search Western Weekender wherever you listen to podcasts, and make sure you hit subscribe. Check out westernweekender.com.au, and we'll see you next time.
It's going inside as we speak.
So what we're seeing cameras from obviously some distance from the actual scene of the Lindt Chocolate Cafe. Now, there has been footage of what I think is another hostage running from the scene with a police escort. So that would be another person. Now, we're seeing footage of... look, I don't know if that's... Yeah, there is a person on that stretcher. Okay, so we're seeing on Sky News footage of an injured person being taken in a stretcher, an ambulance stretcher, obviously being assisted by paramedics. So we've seen that. We've seen one other person be carried by police rescue. We're seeing the footage now on Channel 9 of the moment that heavily armed police stormed this cafe after 17 hours. And we saw hostages run free as a result. Now, just repeating, we do not know if all of the hostages are out. We do not know if there are any hostages that have been seriously injured. And we certainly do not know the fate of the gunman, Man Monis. So this is just dramatic scenes, quite unbelievable in Sydney. It would appear that this hostage situation is now coming to its conclusion after 17 hours. We'll just bring back Channel 9.
Police have moved into position. They've decided to storm the cafe in light of what had happened over the preceding minute or two, which was the fact that 7 hostages came out, and obviously there were things going on inside. It appears as though they might have used a shotgun to blow the hinges off that big door. Then they've gone in, and the police have confirmed to us they've used live ammunition, they've used gunfire. They've gone in with gunfire, and then you can see the other tactical response officers throwing in stun grenades, and you can hear them. They sound like gunfire, but they're stun grenades, and they are used to completely, totally and utterly disorientate the perpetrator.
With the flashing lights and everything
there's flashing lights, there's all sorts of things going on, and he wouldn't have known where he was. But disturbingly, Since the storming of the Lint Cafe, we've seen paramedics move in quite dramatically. We've seen at least one, possibly two people on a stretcher. We've definitely seen one lady on a stretcher, and it doesn't...
So that's Channel 9, continuing coverage here on 2UE, 4BC and our network stations. But just repeating that we've seen a group of hostages run from the Lint Cafe. We do not know the fate of the gunman, Man Monis. We just do not know that current situation. We obviously expect there will be confirmations from police shortly. Now, we saw, as I mentioned, we saw a group of hostages. Then we also saw one man. We saw a woman being carried by police rescue. And we're just seeing that footage again. I did mention that to you, of another hostage, it would appear, with a police escort running from the scene. So, look, we just don't know how many. We don't know how many were in there in the first place. We never had that number confirmed by police. We were saying it was around the 15 mark. But just repeating, there has been...